Well, hey everybody! It's 6 o'clock and it's Friday, so that must mean it's time for Flashcard Friday. And today we're going to continue our look at the minor prophets that Pastor Chad is not going to be covering in his series on Sundays. And today we're going to take a look at three of them. And I chose three today intentionally. We've all heard the story of Jonah inside and out. Most of you could probably recite the bulk of it. So we're not going to spend a lot of time there. Nahum is actually the follow up to Jonah, and then we're gonna spend some time in Zephaniah, and it just dawned on me there should be an H um, on the end of that, and that's gonna bug me. So I'm gonna fix that really quick. But we're gonna spend some time with Zephaniah, and again, please don't judge me for my maps. I'm not a good drawer, but it's gonna become very important when we talk about Zephaniah. So we're gonna start with Jonah, and again, like I said, most of you have heard the story of Jonah multiple times. I know Pastor Chad has preached on it a couple of times, and just kind of a quick refresher. God tells Jonah to go to Nineveh, and Nineveh would be right in here somewhere. And Jonah says no. He doesn't want to go there. He's got multiple reasons for not liking Nineveh, but he chooses to go to Tarshish, and Tarshish is going to be over here somewhere. So he pretty much does the polar opposite thing in trying to get away from God, and he fails. God meets him right about in here in a storm, and he's swallowed by a fish. So just I want to give you just a little gem that some people know, but not everybody knows. Um, there's there's some debate with regards to Jonah, and it's a wild debate to actually watch theologians talk about it. And the question is, did Jonah, when Jonah was in the belly of that fish, did he die? Did he die and then was resurrected by God? And literally, theologians will get in shouting matches, as to whether or not that actually happened. And it comes from Jonah's prayer, which is found in chapter 2. And let me see if I can find it really. Um, right here in verse 4, he says, I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again towards your temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. To the earth, beneath barred me forever. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. I personally, this is my personal opinion. I personally think that Jonah actually did die, and God resurrected him, because again, it goes along with the story. Jesus actually tells the Pharisees that, like Jonah, he will spend 3 days in the he will spend 3 days in the earth, and then arise, and then be resurrected from that. So and then, like, some versions of the Bible, instead of the word pit at the end of that, they have the word Sheol, and Sheol in Hebrew actually meant Hades or hell. So that's just a little thing. It's debated still today. They still get in large shouting matches over whether or not that actually happened. To me, it gives more credibility, to Jesus, even though I would believe Jesus based on way more than that one passage. But I think that it does actually give a little bit more credibility to that. But the one thing that I think everybody needs to take away from the story of Jonah, because remember, at the end, it just ends. It doesn't. I mean, literally, um, God is talking to Jonah, and he says, let me see here. he says, and should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals. And that's where Jonah ends. And to me, that's God. God is explaining to Jonah, it's my time frame. It's not yours. It's mine. Because Nineveh repented as a result of what God had Jonah do. And to me, I think there's a point in that, because 100 years, there's 100 years between Jonah and Nahum, actually writing about the destruction, the impending destruction of Nineveh. How many people were saved in that 100 years? How many generations were saved as a result of what Jonah did? Now, yes, Nineveh, eventually went back to their old ways, seriously, if you think about generational curses, that kind of stuff, eventually they made a turn and they went back to their old ways, and they eventually have to pay for that. And Nahum is he's pretty let's just say he's pretty blunt, just pretty much straightforward and to the point. He says, you guys blew it. You're going to be destroyed, and you're not coming back. Nineveh no longer exists today. Again, it's in the middle of Syria. So, there are no Ninevites left. They've all perished. And in Nahum 3 verse 19, he pretty much seals their fate. When he's basically telling them what God has said. And in verse 19, he says, nothing can heal you. Your wound is fatal. All who hear the news about you clap their hands at your fall, for who has not felt your endless cruelty? Now, I'm sorry, but that's just downright mean. He leaves no room, for any return. And I think, we've all heard, Pastor Chad probably gave the best description of what the Ninevites did to people. They dismembered is a kind way of saying the things that they did. And God reached a point where he said, you're doing this to my kids, and I can't let you do it anymore. So the only way he could do that was to remove them. But again, when we take all of that and we look at today, and God asks us to talk about Christ to that person who just makes our blood boil, that we just, we want to wish nothing but ill will towards them. But God says, wait a minute. It's my timing, not yours. You talking to that person that makes your blood boil, they may share it with somebody else, who shares it with somebody else, who shares it with somebody else. And that's what matters to God, not writing, not writing those types of wrongs, to us. He cares about, the book of Acts says that he cares about all of his people saved. He doesn't want anybody left behind. He wants them all saved. And it's up to us to do that. And I think Jonah and Nahum really help us take a look at that. Because again, like I said, we don't know how many generations were saved as a result of what Jonah did. And even as a result of Nahum saying, hey, you guys blew it. How many people turned as a result of him saying that. So just when you feel God nudging you to go into an arena that you don't necessarily want to go into, I'm right there with you. Think about God's timing, and think about the fact that we don't know. We don't know God's plans. We don't know what he has in store for generation to generation as a result of something that we do. And with that said, we're going to jump to Zephaniah. And Zephaniah he's wild. If you think about there are 12. I wrote them down because I'm not like Pastor Chad. Pastor Chad can remember names. It's just trust me. He's way better at it. But there are 12 minor prophets, and they're separated out into two categories. One is pre-exile, so that's before Assyria and Babylon take them. And then there are some that are post-exile. So you have Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Habakkuk, Nahum, and Zephaniah. Those all deal with pre-exile. Okay, so they are before. They're basically telling everybody of their impending doom. And then Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi are actually the post-exile minor prophets. And we're going to talk about Haggai and Malachi next week, which again, ought to be kind of cool. But just a cool little side note: Zephaniah, his great grandfather is King Hezekiah, who was the king of Judah. So he is the only prophet that came from royalty. And to me, it's kind of apropos that somebody who comes from royalty would be that he's the last to talk about the pre-exile Israel and Judah. And he's basically going to say what happens to everybody. He's going to reiterate all of the prophets who came before him. He's going to reiterate everything that they said about the impending exile. And he's going to talk a little bit about when everybody is brought back together. So, it's just, to me, it's just kind of wild that royalty is the one that has that opportunity to talk about the last one. But something that we need to kind of take a quick look at. I'm actually not going to read this, but in Genesis 15, 18 through 21, God pretty much lays out a map for Abraham of the land that he's going to give him. So if you see here outlined in red, that is the land that God promised that Abraham's descendants would span that area, which in that day and age, that would have been the world, to them. But if we think about it today, so what I did was I put today's map on there. So like all of this is Turkey, and then you have Syria, you have Lebanon sitting here, and again, remember we talked last week about the West Bank, and then there's Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. And if you think Abraham had two sons, he had Ishmael and Isaac. Islam, the primary terrain of Islam is within that area right there. That's where they are actually the most powerful and the most well-known, is within that area. So again, God fulfilled the promise. And then here you will find the predominance of Isaac's children. And then remember too, we talked last week about Jacob and Esau. Esau's descendants all come from this area right here. And then Jacob's descendants are right in here. So again, God continually fulfills what he promises. And there's something it's actually talked about in here, and I meant to talk about it last week, but I didn't, because we did talk about the West Bank and how even today there's a lot of fighting over that. This right here, this little spot, it used to be called Philistia. So back in the days of King David and all of that, this was Philistine territory. And it was one piece of territory that Israel could never take. God never allowed them to take that. And even today, while Zephaniah says that Israel will own it, it's still an area that's in great dispute. So it is still listed as its own country. Some people, you might know it actually as the Gaza Strip. So that is that area there. But basically, Zephaniah comes in and he says, all of you have made massive mistakes. Again, like I said, he's going to go all the way from Hosea, from Hosea to Nahum, and say, this area you did wrong, this area you did wrong. He's more blunt and to the point than Nahum is. I mean, so, some of the wording that he uses, I will sweep away both man and beast. This is God talking through him. I will stretch out my hand against Jerusalem. I will destroy every remnant of Baal. It's like I said, it's blunt, it's straightforward, and it's to the point. But when he talks about Gaza, and we're in chapter 2, and I'm just gonna read verse 7 really quick. Zephaniah says, "The land will belong to the remnant of the people of Judah. There they will find pasture. In the evening they will lie down in the houses of Ashkelon. The Lord their God will care for them. He will restore their fortunes." While Gaza claims its sovereignty, to this day, the shepherds in Israel graze their flocks in Gaza. So, while it may not look the way we would expect it to look, God did in fact fulfill that. Because again, to this day, it's mostly pasture. So, stop and think about that. God has a plan, and he's laid it out, and we seem to think that we can fight against it. That we can say, oh, this scripture applies to me, but this one doesn't. I don't like this scripture, so I'm just going to let it go. Well, that's not how God works. God says this whole book is about our relationship. You don't get to pick and choose. You either take me as a whole or you don't. My hope and my prayer is that everybody says yes to the entire book. But the other side of that too is when God calls us to something, he's doing it for a reason, and we need to follow what he says. We may not lose our lives. Some do. We may not lose our lives if we don't follow him, but we may go through some hardships that we didn't have to go through, because in Zephaniah, God makes it very clear. He's like, nobody else is going to take credit for this. I gave it to you, and I'm taking it away. All through it. I will. The Lord says, I will. But then the other part of that too is God restored it. God's grace restored it. It wasn't anything that any one of them did. God restored them. God said, okay, your punishment has gone far enough. I'm going to give it back to you. I'm not going to give it all back to you. Remember we talked about that last night. But I'm gonna take those remnants and I'm gonna bring my people back. So again, we make mistakes all the time. I'll be the first one to admit I make mistakes. But God is faithful. His grace never, ever stops. And I want to leave you guys with this. You hear a lot of people, they want to think that God's an angry God. It's always God's going to destroy, God's going to destroy, God's going to destroy. But in the very same book, in Zephaniah, where God talks, where you hear about God being angry, God tells you about how he rejoices and the joy that he has in the relationship between us. So if you look at Zephaniah 3, verse 17, the Lord your God is with you, the mighty warrior who saves. He will take great delight in you. In his love, he will no longer rebuke you, but will rejoice over you with singing. The Lord, your God, rejoices over you with singing. Doesn't matter what you've done. Doesn't matter how far you've strayed. When you turn back to him, the first thing he does is rejoice and sing. And his mercy abounds. That to me is worth everything. So I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me. Sorry I went a little bit long this time. I hope you guys have a phenomenal weekend, and I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. We'll talk to you later. Bye.